Welcome to Native Calgarian and Mossy for listening. I'm your host, Michelle Robinson, speaking to you in Mohkinstsis in the Blackfoot Confederacy, home of the Nitsitapi, Tsuut'ina Dene, and the Yiharhi Nakota. I talk about history, current news, unheard news, book clubs, with special guests to give local or national issues a voice through an urban Satu Dene lens. My life's work will be to honor the voices of my ancestors and next generation with humor, love, and truth. Reconciliation is work, not performance. May we honor all Indigenous voices with that courage. Today is November 17th, 2024. Welcome to Native Calgarian. If you enjoy hearing Indigenous content by the Satu Dene woman, my Patreon account is Native Calgarian, where you can pledge and support. Thank you, previous donors, for already showing your support. For those who cannot afford to give, I'd love to hear from you at nativeyyc@gmail.com. Send in your comments or your questions. Give a review on whatever medium you listen to. I also have a YouTube channel where you can subscribe. You can go to nativecalgarian.com for the latest podcasts and pin posts on social media. I did want to make the announcement on November 17th that I have left Twitter. So there are a few fake accounts already trying to pretend to be me, and they are not me. So, and always remember to share the things that you learned to your network. So I have been getting some incredibly ignorant comments since Reconciliation Week, really. Sisters in Spirit. Now, Taylor Swift coming to Toronto has wielded some of the worst racism I have seen in a lot of years. So, folks, if you're not sharing what you're learning to your network, you're not really being an ally. You're not really helping, and you're not helping forward reconciliation. So, Oki, Nagana go mekoche chestakom aki. Nara daga bekot nagotini siku seradi. My name is Red Thunder Woman. My married English name is Michelle Robinson, and I use they and them pronouns as a cis straight. My Dene lineage roots me in the land of the Great Bear Lake tribe in Treaty 11 in Bellany. I am a native to Turtle Island, and my Dene nation is uninvited to this area of Fincho Tine Indahe in Satu Dene, meaning many big dog town, named after the Calgary Stampede. I was born in Calgary or in Blackfoot, Mohkinstsis, as Michelle Elliott, an English name that has afforded me privilege in an English colonial world. Acknowledging proximity to whiteness is important because the darker the skin, the more racism a person experiences in colonial spaces. And in my case, because my dad is white, I got to not go to Indian residential school. And my brother didn't have to go to an Indian hospital and instead went to the Alberta Children's Hospital. So that's why acknowledgement of whiteness is important. My late great-grandfather is Milo Bewell from Delaney. His daughter, Alice, is my now late great-granny. My mother and I are Northern Slavey Dene or Satu Dene, but my Indian Act imposed status card by the Canadian government says Yellowknives Dene. Through my father, I am a daughter of the Mayflower and a daughter of the American Revolution. Having a Canadian Indian Act imposed status card is a colonial construct by Canadian policies meant to divide Indigenous peoples' inherent rights. Indigenous Two-Spirit or the Indigenous 2S LGBTQ plus community, gender diverse, and Indigenous women are at the bottom of the Canadian socio-economic ladder because of colonial trauma, imposed poverty, racism, gendered violence, and land theft. According to the Quality of Life report for 2024 from the Calgary Foundation, life is harder if you're part of a racialized group. 42% of members of a racialized group do not have timely access to culturally appropriate health and well-being services. 40% of members of a racialized group can't find suitable employment, which is up from 31% from last year. I am not a social worker, nor an elder, nor do I speak on behalf of all Indigenous people. I share my journey as an Indigenous mother navigating this colonial, ableist, misogynistic, racist world in 2024. As a trauma-informed Dene woman who has attempted to run, join harmful colonial parties, spent money to be at expensive conventions, left my home, travel to those conventions just to vote on incomplete policies, still allow for colonial incarceration, a denial of justice, a denial of health service, racism, colonial trauma and genocide of Indigenous and Black peoples, I have work to continue, reports to advocate for, and attempt to work within these systems meant to harm me and my community. I think of this today. I hope we always honor the many Indigenous lives lost for this so-called country named Canada. I hope you see the role and importance of stopping the harm, and as a citizen, see your role in reconciliation and as a treaty partner. Pride Month should never be 1 month. It's important to understand that this straight agenda and gendered violence wasn't as for some of these lands Christian outsiders. When I see queer community not advocate for the 231 calls to justice, it just re-emphasizes that white supremacy, colonial supremacy, and I'm just encouraging people to understand the gravity of those 231 calls to justice being for all of us, not just some. Land acknowledgements are critical for creating a safer space for Indigenous, as well as honoring the host as a guest and honoring and acknowledging your role as a treaty partner. It is supposed to be reconciliation time. Can they be performative? Of course. It is important to understand that land acknowledgements have meaning. Otherwise, you're just creating more harm. I encourage all to introduce themselves with an acknowledgement of their ancestors, stories of displacement, how you perceive your role as a treaty partner, a citizen of Canada, a refugee, or other land displacement, so we as Indigenous peoples know how safe you are to be around. If you won't pronounce your local Indigenous nations' names, won't say your pronouns, say your story of origin, don't acknowledge stolen lands, won't acknowledge imposed economic oppression or your role in reconciliation, I determine how safe you are to be around my community, my family, and myself, because we face the most colonial violence based on ignorance or way worse, willful anti-Indigenous biases. Understanding land acknowledgements and their importance is Indigenous 101. It immediately addresses colonialism, oppression dynamics, broken treaties, and lies taught today in Canadian schools nationally. That's why settlers and those who call themselves native Calgarians or whatever town you're from, you show me you have no Indigenous 101 understanding. You're showing me your ignorance. Jesse Winte's book, Unreconciled, explains it perfectly, as do many other Indigenous author books. 2024, this is just ignorance at this point. Land back is a movement that could save the planet from climate change created by colonialism and capitalism. But it would be a part of a treaty partnership, part of meaningful reconciliation, and honoring global initiatives like the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. As a former geomatics drafter, I would happily teach you more. But you have to pay me, because I had to pay the colonial system to go to school for that. You can also go to nativecalgarian.com for more. Thank you so much. With that, I want to introduce my friend and allow you to introduce yourself in your way.
Okay. Tansi, nitasiaga son Griffin Bjerke-Clarke. Saskatchewan na totchen, ospinaka sisteki na totchen. Minna, natatamenan, eayan, Oma. It's a hard one to say at the end there. So first, I'd like to apologize to any speakers listening in. I'm still just reconnecting with this language. It was in my family for a very long time. My grandfather comes from a reserve called Fort Vermilion, very far in North Alberta. He moved there. He moved out of there in the 50s or so because he didn't want his children to grow up without electricity or running water. Since that time, there's been a lot of sort of shame on that side of the family when acknowledging our history. He's definitely part of what Métis people describe as the lost generation. And it wasn't really until the end for him that he started acknowledging these roots. And he spent a lot of his time in life trying to attain, Indian status through the Cree Nation. and that was still held as like a gold standard at the time. But since then we've learned to embrace our Métis heritage as a nation in our own right. That being said, I'd like to echo everything Michelle just said, about acknowledging proximity to whiteness in particular. Even compared to a lot of my siblings and certainly my grandfather, I look a lot paler, a lot more white passing in complexion than they are, and I've noticed that really does impact my experience in society. The few sort of one-off incidents I've had with racism have only been when I'm either in events or dressed in a certain way or talking in a certain way. And so it's important for me to acknowledge, I think, that this is, my experience with all of that is limited, and it's definitely not a daily struggle like it is again for our siblings and our siblings with darker skin. Um, and so then that being said as well, my father is a settler. He's half well, his father's side of the family are Norwegian and Ukrainian. Came over. A lot of people might have small alarm bells if I don't say when they came over, but came over in around early 1910s. And then his mother's side of the family are almost exclusively descended from the British Isles. So that's also very much like shaped my experience, and my indigenous heritage from my mother's side has been something I have to actively sort of pursue and actively reconnect with, as well as make sure that I'm not talking over other people who are a lot closer to the struggle than I am. And then I guess all there is else to say is, I forgot to say I use him, he, him pronouns. I'm still I've got a lot of family members and friends and so on, and in trans non-binary communities. I'm still trying to learn a little bit more, trying to be a better ally to them.
Yeah.
It's important as well to realize that all of these struggles are connected, and that
Yes.
Two-Spirit people were important people in our communities prior to colonization, and it is directly linked to colonization, sort of the displacement of them that we've seen these last few years.
Yes.
And to acknowledge that it's only been 500 years or so of colonization, essentially the land is blinked. And that's all that some people can remember. But our communities have been here at the very least for 20,000 years, if not longer.
Yeah, 100%. A good Blackfoot friend of mine, he always says, just dig deeper.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Right.
Yeah, so I love that about him because he's right. Like for as long as people have been here, that's how long the Blackfoot have been here. So,
Mm-hmm.
and I always respect that. And my people are from up north. And I remember asking my auntie when I was younger because I didn't understand it took a lot for me to be here today, and I didn't understand a lot. And I'm like, well, what's the difference between us and the Inuit? And not understanding that we all had different languages and different ways, but that she was just like the tree line. That's it, the tree line. And so yeah, yeah. And I was like, oh, that's why, that's why. And since then, obviously understanding we're the hair people and understanding. Here's a fun thing for you is that I'll probably take this out, but oh, maybe it'll stay in. I always talk about being a hair person because our people showed up in rabbit skin, but the thing is, in Blackfoot territory, you can't go to ceremony with anything rabbit. So I have to always be really careful about that because that's their ways. And
Mm-hmm.
respectfully, I'm in their territory. Do as the Romans do, right?
Yeah.
So yeah. And kind of back to the queer conversation. I'm really glad you said what you said. I think sometimes when people hear it from other people, it means more. And part of the reason why Sam and I are trying to use they and them is more, not only do we have non-binary and trans family members, but that bigger picture is that our language had to invent he and she,
Mm-hmm.
right? It was always they, them. And so I think if we honor that and go back to decolonizing our language and using they, them in my language anyway, that helps normalize it, not just for the non-binary and trans, but like a decolonizing way to think of
Mhm.
language in general. So
Yeah,
not this
no, that's great.
binary. Yeah.
Yeah, well, and in Creed, to my knowledge, there still isn't any he or she. It's still just Booyah is the one for everybody. I have the privilege now of taking a Mi'kmaq language class because I'm going to school over here in Mi'kmaqi in Chipoktuk. And so well, he comes in sometimes with like a little shirt or post, and it says "negum" is my pronoun because that's their gender neutral sort of third person singular pronoun in Mi'kmaq. Uh, no, no, and
I
he's
love that.
yeah, no, and it I think it kind of took a few people off guard a little bit, and they kind of misunderstood what he meant by it.
Yep.
But the more he explained, and he's an old guy, right? And so on. But the more he explained it, I think the more people could get behind it, you know.
Hmm.
Yeah, and I'd love to get to a point where I've moved past some of this stuff a little bit, where I can say, "we" is my pronoun.
Yeah, no, I feel you. And for me, trying to understand my language, like so far I've only gotten a few words here and there. And Naga is one that's like the Bigfoot for most folks. Naga
Oh yeah.
is the term we use. So and I appreciate that because, I really dislike the way, there's like the terminology of something so spiritual to us has been so horribly misused. And like in
Hmm.
Alberta, we had our premier like start a fight with Hollywood over a Sasquatch movie because um in his mind it was anti-energy. But in my mind, I'm like, the only thing I'm going to agree with you is that Hollywood should not be taking our symbols of, spirituality and just making light of them in a negative way. And so, it's just such a weird time that, people are open to these conversations, but some people are definitely not open to these conversations. So,
Hmm.
yeah, I appreciate having this with you. One of the reasons why I had you on today was because you are going to be publishing a book.
Yeah, no, that's right. So the book is called "He Who Would Walk the Earth." It's available for pre-order for people that like to do that. Yeah, it's on Fernwood's website. It's good. They're a very like local grassroots sort of publisher. I think they have one office here, and I think they have one in Winnipeg still. Yeah, so it's been a very good experience to kind of work with them as almost exclusively the people that I've been working with on this book have been either indigenous or racialized in some capacity. Because I feel like I should tell people as well, like, before you get reading this thing, it does kind of deal with a lot of those common themes, right? Like it follows this guy, Felix, right? Who's kind of wandering around the earth. And he can't remember who he is. He doesn't know where he's come from. And it's only through kind of interacting with the world that he finds that he remembers slowly. And so it's partially an exploration of things like colonial trauma, of things like, repressed memories and things like that. But the thing that I try to do is I find a lot of the time too many of these works of literature, they kind of focus on the misery and the pain and
Mm.
and the trauma, and they kind of get lost in it. But what I tried to make sure is in all of the book is there's always a sense of hope, and there's always a sense of moving past it, sometimes literally.
Hmm.
um yeah, and then yeah, no, and it's been very good because the people at Fernwood are very culturally sensitive, like we have like proofreaders, sensitivity readers, going over everything. Because there's a lot of difficult stuff in there, and it's sort of by writing about the difficult stuff and exploring it and kind of talking about it that we can get to somewhere else. Because
Hmm.
it's what indigenous people, is what we've been saying for ages, right? If you don't understand the history, if you don't understand the past, then we can't get anywhere. We can't do anything, you know.
Yep. Yep. What's incredible to me is how right now in Canada we have such like two pathways of thinking about the history. And
Hmm.
like, the new settlers and such that have come here have such a fantasy idea of what Canada is, as
Hmm.
opposed to our people. And for what I find so incredible is because there's so many nations across the country, is learning small nuggets of each one of their nations' history to get to this moment right here. And I just want to share with you real quick. I was at this Science Up First event, and there are people that are like, "Look, we got to start, promoting the importance of misinformation versus real information." And
Hmm.
one of the spokespeople there, she was racialized, and she was a part of a national organization, and they weren't necessarily for nuclear because of the unresolved history that has happened to especially my people. And I was like, finally, because I just find that sometimes you find people who are so for science, they're like, yeah, no, nukes are the way to go. And I'm like, have you considered at all coming through this intersectional lens? And yeah, so I really was happy to see that there is starting to be a bit of understanding, like, oh man, we can't just do things and not understand the legacy of what this has cost us.
Hmm.
Especially here in Alberta, we have so many abandoned wells and problems with politicians not acknowledging that. And so as we move forward, I'm hoping that we'll start making better solutions. But I don't have a lot of faith in colonial politics and colonial decisions anymore. But hopefully, in time, the politics will be a little less wild, and we'll be able to have, normal conversations about it as opposed to these wild conspiracy ones. Really, I'm kind of sad about how folks are handling it. So this book that you have, I think it's an important reflection of that history, that we talk about what it is that is real to us as Indigenous people, and start writing down these histories, because clearly the non-Indigenous, some of them haven't even read the 94 Calls to Action. I
Hmm.
was having a Twitter conversation with someone who claimed they did, and said, well, land acknowledgements is right in the 94 Calls to Action. And I started laughing so hard. I'm like, thanks for
Yeah.
telling me you didn't read them.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
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 Well,
What was it like to write a book, and how do you feel, like, how did you feel about the process? How long did it take you? And really, well, like, what was your decision? I have to write this.
oh, sort of what happened is, well, during my first year at university, I noticed they have what's called a foundation year program where they teach you, quote unquote, foundational things about, every, about philosophy, science, this kind of thing. And what was immediately apparent to me is it was incredibly Western centric, incredibly Eurocentric. And it was presented as though, like, the thought of Plato and then of Aristotle, and then later on of Martin Luther and Dante and all these guys, even getting into people who are like outright for the extermination of our people, like Thomas Hobbes and John Locke. This was the knowledge with the that kind of set the stage and provided the foundation upon which all other knowledge must come.
Mm-hmm.
And it's presented as though before you understand anything, you have to understand this. And it bothered me quite a bit because I don't want to bother people too much, but when I read these books, a lot of them are just idiots, you know.
Yeah, 100%. And
And
drunks. I
yeah.
think of like Winston Churchill being
Oh,
so celebrated,
yeah.
and we have a new statue that just came up here. Jason Kenney wanted it.
Hmm.
And, and we have all of these schools like John A. Macdonald who literally
Hmm.
want us exterminated.
Yeah.
And everybody's like, yeah, we're not going to have this conversation anymore. We're happy with
Hmm.
this name. And I'm like, I just can't imagine telling a Jewish population that, no, we really like the Hitler name. We're just going to keep that up. And,
Yeah.
and that's just so normalized in Canada. It's just
Hmm.
horrid. So I'm really
Yeah.
glad that that's why you decided to write this, because it's black and white different, are different histories.
No, exactly. Well, and I felt I picked a lot of fights with these the professors and tutors and so on, just because. The one thing they told everyone at the start, coming in, understanding that this is something of another activist generation, and we're a little bit more aware, some of us, right? They told us, don't just say in your essays these people are racist. Don't just comment on their racism. That's not an argument on its own. And I could say I was a little bit taken aback. It just sounded like they just didn't want to talk about it. And two things they hid behind every time is they either said that it was nuanced, or they said that this was an anachronistic discussion. And that second point is particularly irritating because it essentially says that all of the racialized people, all of the, well, even just the poor working class in these local sort of communities that they would have been writing adjacent to, we just didn't matter, at the time. We didn't have perspectives. We didn't have a written word. We don't even matter. So bringing us up is an anachronism. And it got frustrating with me. And so I decided to go like the extra step in some of these essays and explain why the racism that you find in somebody like John Locke or Thomas Hobbes that went after quite extremely, it's an integral part of their worldview. It's not
Yep.
separable from the rest of their philosophy. Thomas Hobbes' idea that humanity is inherently violent and barbarous and in need of some king chosen by God to rule over everybody, or else we'll just eat each other alive, essentially. That's a racist idea. It's founded
Yeah.
in racism, and he
Yep.
used my ancestors and many people's ancestors to illustrate that point by referring to what he called the savage people of the Americas. It's not something that you can remove from the philosophy. It is directly echoed by it. And so I
Yeah.
kind of decided to write this book, which is a fiction that it lampoons and it pokes fun at a lot of these philosophies. It has embodiments of these points of view, and I try to take them to their logical extreme.
Hmm.
Um, we have a point of view character who kind of wanders through and sees, the end point of this kind of belief. And what I realized very early on is that just kind of essentially taking a stick and hitting a lot of these philosophers, no matter how much they deserve it, it's going to be a little bit tedious to read for some people.
Yeah.
Just kind of relentlessly saying these people that you were brought up to respect and revere, they're dumb and we don't know anything. It's some people are going to be very hostile to that, is what I realized. So what was important to me then is to demonstrate that there's an alternative, that there have been many people all over the world who have written and who have spoken and who have been thinking about the world in completely different lights. And so I kind of put these two ideas in dialogue with each other and say there
Hmm.
is an alternative viewpoint. We don't
Yes.
have to accept their reality as the foundation upon which all other realities exist. you know their findings came after several thousand years of other philosophies, some of which came directly from Europe, of course, and were directly displaced by things like Christianity and the Roman Empire.
Hmm.
So I feel like it's important, especially when reaching a settler audience, to kind of give them the alternative and
Yeah.
and answer that really annoying question. They're like, well, what do you want then? you know
Yeah.
and
I
it was
know
nice.
equality is such a difficult concept for them, and like I've talked about being treaty partners, like
Mhm.
that was the intention for us to be treaty partners.
Yeah.
And they're like, why do you guys have to complain? And it's like, what kind of equality do you see? Because I don't see that equality that you think we have. And
Hmm.
I can show you systemic oppression. I can show you policies, and yet there's still this like commitment to racism, commitment to colonialism, commitment to othering, and to talking down to us as people. So I'm glad you did that. Like I think of a Nelson Mandela, who was
Hmm.
considered and labeled a terrorist until he was fine, until apartheid was finally done, and that's how we are looked at. Still, we are looked in the bad days of Nelson Mandela as opposed to seeing us as treaty partners, as people willing to share their land with people
Hmm.
who are willing to be equal to us, but they don't want equality, they want oppression, and that's the issue. So I'm really glad you wrote this book. Is it fair to say that it's like a kind of a way to get through school? Because I get,
Hmm.
I always give post-secondary the hardest time for their racism that they have, their anti-Indigenous bias. And to me, this is like a healing book of like, oh my God, if I have to put up with this, we are definitely making fiction of the reality here because this is wild.
Yeah, no, that's fair to say. And a lot of it is so a lot of but most of the little amount of like real systemic oppression I've faced has been at the hand of like school teachers,
Yeah.
who didn't necessarily consciously see me as indigenous, but they saw a kid in the back of the room with a braid who couldn't sit still, right? Um, and you kind of, I remember some of the comments that were given to me. I remember like some of the things that they tell my parents. And it was very clear like what was going on in hindsight. It just wasn't apparent to me at the time because well, when you're a kid, it's all about the surface level, right? And you
Yeah.
you don't realize, which side of the line you fall on necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of the book, especially the bits that are told in flashback, are directly paralleled, if not like inspired by experiences I either had in elementary school or experiences that were around me. Because I don't remember a lot about an elementary school in Regina, but I do remember a few things, and it's normally not the good stuff, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So my grandparents, my on my white father's side, they're from Yorkton, Saskatchewan. So
Mm,
I had spent some time in Saskatchewan over the course of my childhood, and
mm,
yeah, unfortunately, they were very racist towards Indigenous people, and they were the ones who always tried to put my head, but not you. Like you're the exception,
mm,
and it hurt because it's like you're still talking about my own family that way. And so when I don't mean to trigger anybody, but when the Colton Bushi issue happened, like I knew that the atmosphere of Saskatchewan and Alberta's no different. We had those Métis men that were killed, and shockingly, they actually found the shooters guilty. So that's the difference, obviously, as opposed to that farmer. And then in Winnipeg, obviously, so many horrible situations that need rectifying immediately and haven't been. It's ongoing. So yeah,
mm.
the prairies in general, I just find to be so horrid when it comes to our treaty partnership. And
Yeah.
I wish that we had investment in education to change that, but we actually have the opposite. We have like here in Alberta, we have a premier and the successor committed to still giving misinformation to Alberta children. So it's really
Mm,
problematic, and that's why I have so respect, so much respect for you writing this book and all of the Indigenous authors writing books. I have three new books in front of me that are local to Calgary and just fantastic reads, and they're all self-published books. So I wanted to ask you what made you choose Fernwood and not do self-publishing?
yeah. Well, I did do one book of short stories with a guy called Jason Eagle Speaker, who's he's a Blackfoot from I believe from northern United States. Yeah. Or he's from Calgary. I didn't know
Yeah,
that.
yeah, and
Yeah.
he's like the Blackfoot Confederacy goes south into the Blackfeet Nation. So
Yeah.
I find a lot of the Blackfoot like they have family and relatives in all of the, four. It's not just like I know what the territory looks like, but I know a lot of people just have like the reserves kind of in their head and like prior to the Indian Act, like it was a massive chunk of land that even went into
Mhm.
Saskatchewan, right?
Yeah. Yeah, a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. So I published that with him. Actually, around the time we met in Calgary, that was like around the time that was getting finalized. It was a good experience, but sort of the issue with a lot of those things is it really relies on kind of self promotion and kind of
mm,
like putting the word out there yourself. And it was nice because he gave me all kinds of creative freedom. He was terrific to work with.
yeah.
But at the same time, I was just like, I'm not going to reach too many people this way, and it's just a sad reality. I'm hoping like more people will pick up on his publishing house. It's called Eagle Speaker Publishing, and they're based just out of Halifax. He's another prairie guy living living on the East Coast, and you know, and it's a good experience, like working with such small publishers, because that's where you get the real stories some of the time. That's where you get stories that are unfiltered and don't have to go through like marketing boards. But at the same time, it's kind of it's hard to reach a big audience, and I was just like, I wanted to do that one day eventually
Yeah.
through a book. So I was looking for publishers, and the problem with most of these publishers is, obviously I can't name names, but a lot of them didn't like the book, or they wanted to change it, or they thought that it would be a little bit too weird, in places. Until I found Fernwood. So they were just kind of a nice kind of middle ground, because they're very like grassroots based as well. But they also have a bit more of a reach. They have a bit more of an established reputation.
Oh
And so,
gosh, yeah.
yeah, so
Yeah.
kind of my hope is that through hearing about that, people will maybe start to look at Jason's work as well a little bit, and that there can be kind of like some give and take there, because he does a lot of very good work. He works directly with a lot of community-based authors. Some of them are children, some of them are 8 years old, and they're writing their first book,
Yeah.
you know. And I
Yeah.
don't know too many other people, indigenous or not, who are doing that. So
Yeah.
so I always want to like shout him out, because this is my first novel. This isn't my first book, and my first book was working with him. Yeah, and there are a lot of very personal stories in that as well.
Well, now one, I'm ordering it, and two, we're going to be including that link in with this link for your novel that's coming out with Fernwood. So
Yeah.
I'm so excited to hear that. And I actually was talking to an author, and he had said that the self-published book is what helped him get into a publisher, and so I love WordFest, so I went to WordFest, and that was what one of the authors had said, and I was like, oh, okay. So I've been thinking a lot about that because um, Richard Van Camp is coming to my house on Tuesday, and
Oh.
yeah, he's just like a total uncle. He's like, I'm coming to you, and I'd like to be on your podcast. I'm like, fangirling, yes, absolutely. And
Hmm.
so I'm going to talk to him about that because like he's published his people said like 30 books in 30 years or something. I can't quite remember what I'm supposed to say for his podcast, but
Hmm.
regardless, he's published so much. And so I keep thinking like, yeah, I know you just got to get started, you got to get going. And I have Gets Crazy Boy's second book here in front of me too. And
Hmm.
my hope is that us as Indigenous people can really start creating our bigger libraries.
Hmm.
And the thing about Richard Van Camp's book that I love that I'm hearing through you too is that we can put our truths in a fiction book, and
Hmm.
and that I really appreciate. And that same author who said that how he did it, he said the same thing where you can just tell so many more truths within
Hmm.
fiction, and so I'm thinking about that a lot too. How I would make my world look in a fiction novel as opposed to I just recently got diagnosed with ADHD, so that would be new to you since I seen you last. And I suspect I have autism as well. So and the autism diagnosis I'll probably never get, because if I have an extra $5,000, then I'm absolutely flying to Halifax to go take a Titanic where I'm not, going to put it towards an autism diagnosis. So um, just that bigger picture is that I think a lot of us who have like clearly creative skills, but just not harnessed in a colonial context. So
Yeah.
I love hearing this, and it's a theme I'm hearing through so many Indigenous authors. So I appreciate you telling that.
Yeah. Well, and it's just important to as well like acknowledge the role of like bigger but still small publishers, especially like Fernwood. Because I don't know that like any of the big publishers would do what they've done, and make sure that indigenous eyes are seeing this thing first, and
Yeah.
reading
Well,
it
it's
over.
easier to take a filter of criticism through that lens
Mhm.
as opposed to like with non-Indigenous, like if they don't even understand like the theme, if they don't understand treaty, it's like think you understand what I'm trying to say here at all. So
Mhm.
I really appreciate that. And I hope more non-Indigenous publishers to learn more about it so that that way, we can take their criticism at or constructive criticism maybe in a better way. But yeah, I find with POC, like I had an incident happen to me last night. And there was a Black woman that watched the whole thing, and she was the one who came up to me in tears. Like, I hate that we have to deal with this every day. And so I was consoling her.
Yeah.
And it's like, so that it's a lot easier to take criticism from a person who understands what, that racial battle fatigue that we go through. So I'm so happy to
Mhm.
hear all of this. And I can't wait to read this book. I'm going to have to pre-order your novel as well as actually get your self-published one through Eagles Publishing because
Mhm.
like I just love hearing stories of people doing their writing. And I actually never appreciated poetry until recently
Mhm.
when I just realized like um, there's no healing colonialism. You just have people that are like, stuck at being jackholes about it. So,
Mhm.
like, and seeing healing through poetry, and it was Lee Miracle's book actually on
Mhm.
women that I was like, this is healing. Reading Indigenous poetry helped heal me in a different way, and remind me who I am, and help me get through that moment, and
Mhm.
remember too, Michelle of 2024 is not going through what my mom had to go through in the 80s and not what my
Mhm.
granny had to go through, et cetera, et cetera. So,
Yeah.
just to be, because like my uncles are like, I have no sympathy for, what you guys are going through right now because I know what we went through and it was worse. And they're right, 100%.
Mhm. Yeah.
Deep respect for that. And I'm glad that we're the generation that can tell those stories. And
Mhm.
I was trying to tell this table, obviously it didn't matter, but that I was the first generation to try to reclaim who I am and try to reclaim our indigeneity in general. And they just still were committed to the I'm white, I look white, I talk white, so I'm
Mhm.
white kind of mentality. So, yeah.
Yeah.
And
No, I still have cousins who think that way.
yeah,
It's disappointing to see because there, I feel like people are slowly coming around to the idea that like indigeneity is much more than like how you look. It's how you grow up. It's
yes.
where your family's from. It's what traditions you practice, and it's your connection to these communities.
Mhm.
Um, and it's quite heartbreaking sometimes because you see family that have those connections but don't want to acknowledge them.
Yes.
And we're only now just getting rid of some of that shame. And
Well, and
you know,
even me, I didn't get a chance to tell you this, but somebody accused me of being a pretend Indian, which is ridiculous
uh,
because, like, I
mhm,
have my status card. I've showed that. I've talked about my family's history on this podcast and beyond a million times. But a little ashamed of my grandfather for a long time, and found out through this pretend Indian stuff that turns out I do have some Cree and some script. So, I had a lot of unpacking to do with my grandpa who passed, and understanding that I can't be ashamed of him. He literally lied about being a treaty Indian in Yellowknife because he needed to work, and at that time they didn't accept Indigenous to work in the mines.
right.
So, like I have to have a deeper respect for what he did do to try to
Mhm,
raise his family. And yeah, so I appreciate you saying that and know even that's still internalized in me too. And I have to
mhm.
undo that and teach my daughter to do better.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, and I mean, you should look into what his last name was if if he was a
I
Lizard,
know.
they were
Yeah, I
cousins.
have that info. I will send that to you, Griffin,
Okay,
because
yeah.
I know
No.
you will care, actually. You're probably one of the only people who do. So, well, that and the young researcher who did it for me, like, it's a fantastic human being who is also Métis and reclaiming his indigeneity as well.
No,
And
it's good.
I think they may use they them. So I'm going to try to start using they them for them as well because they're just fabulous. And at the UFC, researching all the time, right? So when somebody had the audacity. He actually found the original records of my granny going into residential school and the ones coming out of residential school. So we had that exact like date to tell now,
Wow.
and so I was going to write that in my TRC book so that that way, we have that timeline for Sam in the future. Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah.
Yeah, well, and you can include this or not, it's up to you. But it's funny you bring up Richard Van Camp because a lot of these, I have to write, I have to reach out to so many authors for endorsements, and even like some prior writing instructors I've had. Yeah, maybe don't include that. They haven't been the most responsive. They've been a little bit hostile about it. And Richard Camp, Richard Van Camp, he turned me down technically, but it wasn't because he didn't want to or anything. He just said I'm too busy for this. But he did offer to promote this thing on Facebook a little bit closer. So I gotta get in touch with that guy. But when you see him, let him know I say hi. I guess.
I sure will. My
Yeah,
goodness. Yeah, he's a great guy.
yeah.
And his publisher gave me two of his books, so I was reading one. I want to tell you all about it, but I can't. I want to talk about your book. I want to hear and again, telling truth through fiction is clear through this book, and that's what I
Mhm.
want for your book as well. So
Yeah, no, it's always like because he's one of the big people that kind of inspired me to start doing this. The other one was like Drew Hayden Taylor, uh, another huge inspiration. And then there are like, of course, just like recent people that I have to acknowledge because without them, there'd be no way I'd be doing this today, right? There's like Maria Campbell is a huge name. If she didn't write Half Breed in like the 70s, I just there's no way I'd ever be able to approach a publisher with this manuscript in any capacity.
you know
Um,
what Lee Miracle had to do? She had to like literally get a petition with signatures and a commitment from people on that saying, I will buy her book if you publish it. That's
wow.
how she had to get her first book published. And I think about how many of our, predecessors have like done the trail so that you and I could walk those,
Hmm.
it's just incredible to me. And I obviously thinking a lot about Murray Sinclair since he
Hmm.
just passed and
Yeah.
what he did for us as well. So
Hmm.
I appreciate you talking about all of these people in such good ways as I do, because if it wasn't for them, I wouldn't be here today either.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and then like recent people as well, like Jean Taillé has done quite a lot to sort of make sure people know who the heck Métis people are in the first place. Because
Yes.
especially in Eastern Canada, there's so much confusion. Yeah,
That is a open, like controversial issue happening out
yeah.
there. Man, oh man, I had one of my book club selections was a woman who was claiming to be Indigenous, and when you looked at her photos, she looked like a little Native girl, but
Hmm.
even her sister was like she's not Native, and
Hmm.
so
Yeah.
whether or not mom and dad had an affair and she had Cree blood in her, that's kind of their family issue. So
Hmm. Yeah. Well,
yeah,
and
it's tough, and that I find is kind of the conversation that happens up east there. So I
oh yeah. Well, in the East Coast is weird because like you get like Acadian people who maybe have one indigenous great grandparent from years ago before they were kind of expelled to Cape Breton. And they claim that they're Métis, even though it doesn't make any sense, you
yeah,
know.
yeah.
And there's maybe a point like I'm sympathetic to the view that maybe we can recognize Acadians as like emphasize that they were oppressed as well,
Yeah,
like I'm open to that, but that doesn't make them Métis all of a sudden, it's
100%. They are
yeah,
their distinct own type of people, and
yeah.
I respectfully feel the same. Where like what they went through was absolutely disgusting and wrong,
Hmm.
and yeah, I wish more people talked about New Orleans and the
Hmm.
connection as well there. But it is what it is. So
Yeah.
I just I wish like back to hiding our history. I wish all Canadians knew what we were talking about as well.
Hmm.
And it's sad that you and I have on our free time have to research that history and learn
Yeah.
an actual history as opposed to just being taught this in school. And
Hmm.
so, and then not having to fight their ignorant kids who've been taught all lies as well. Like that's still where we're at as a society, as a child.
Yeah, no, and it's to the point now where I go over some of the experiences I had living briefly in Europe during like sort of like this study abroad exchange sort of thing. And I try to tell people, Northern Europe, it has a very big racism problem. That shouldn't be a controversial thing to say, but I have people telling me, no, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. What are you talking about? I meet tons of people from Northern Europe. They're not racist. It's like, well, they're not going to be racist to you, but
Right.
you know,
I
this.
know I'm having all the Swifties coming up in my junk because they don't like what I had to say that, the land acknowledgement was like that's part of the you go to Toronto Scotia Centre Arena,
Mm,
you have to have this up as people are filing in. And they're like, oh my God, Taylor Swift is such an ally. It's like
uh,
she has never talked about Indigenous issues ever. Why are you
mhm,
guys giving her credit? Holy.
yeah.
So anyway, yeah, it's sad. And and that's their level of they think they're not racist, but then they'll do the horrid things. I took screenshots of some of the horrid things people were saying to me, pointing out she's no ally to Indigenous people. And
Mhm.
man, like definitely got their pennies in a bunch over that one.
Yeah, no, it doesn't take much, is the thing.
Yeah.
It
So,
never takes much.
well, is there anything else you'd like to add today to this discussion?
Well, just briefly, I'd like to acknowledge that we had a mutual contact in Calgary, while I was working and in from the cold down there. I don't know, like, she probably wouldn't appreciate me like giving out her name, so I won't. But you know, she knows who she is, and I'd like to just acknowledge that because of her, we came into contact, and it's been really great knowing you, this just over a year now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I love your text updates and I loved when I got to meet you here. Did you want to talk about that organization at all or no?
Katimovic, or
Yeah. How was
yeah.
your experience with that?
So, um, hmm, where to start with Katimovic? I like, yeah, it was it was a mixed experience. I will say that.
Fair.
Specifically, like just as a general summary, I like the structure of it. I'm not happy that it looks like they're losing their funding now. I'm not happy that under this new government that we're probably expecting,
Yeah,
they're not going to last. I'm not happy about these things.
sure.
However, I do need to acknowledge that they say things, they claim to be committed to reconciliation, but it's very often very tokenistic and very surface level. Their audience with their TNR programming is almost exclusively, well, it's almost exclusively white settler youth that are targeted with this stuff.
Sure.
There's me and there was another indigenous participant. We were constantly very triggered, very traumatized by a lot of the stuff that we were experiencing through the programming.
Mm.
And we had support in the beginning to kind of go and pursue our own stuff, just from the program leader, but it wasn't that wasn't the case in the second half of our experience, and that was at the whim of the people who were in charge of the houses we were at.
Sure.
Um, and then the other thing worth keeping in mind is that I don't think they do enough to collaborate with local indigenous organizations at all. I was very lucky with In From the Cold. I will say that they have a very solid relationship with the indigenous community, and they do try. But that's not the case with a lot of the organizations that Katimovic chooses to work with, and sometimes it leads to experiences that don't represent the values Katimovic claims to uphold.
Mm.
Um, and so I like the organization as an idea. I think it's a very good sort of model and a very good sort of concept. I just hope that if they're able to continue having funding in the future, that they use it a little bit more responsibly, and they try to be better treaty partners with us in the future.
Me too. Me
Yeah.
too, my friend. Oh, I'm happy to hear that. That your experience was like it is mixed and such, so that other Indigenous people, if they hear about that, organization, that they can try to determine if that's the right thing for them. Because I know there was something happened in Japan, and there was a group of kids that went there and ended up almost being slaves. And so they were not happy and they had to pay their way back, and they were made promises. Actually, I think it was New Zealand. It was like a settler
Mm-hmm.
run organization trying to indigenize and do some sort of like student exchange, but instead the Canadian Indigenous that went down there had to like pay out of pocket a bunch of things and were expected to work. And I was just like, what? This is wild. So, I've heard some really poor examples of settlers trying to reconcile and then just, again, creating more harm, as I've said about poor land acknowledgements. It just creates more harm. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I really appreciate you sharing that about them. And it's hard to, so everyone on my podcast knows I'm a liberal. And so, when it ended because of Harper, I was sad in some ways, but at the same time, I wasn't a part of it. So I didn't have that emotional investment. And then
Mm-hmm.
to hear Justin so excited about it and redoing it and it being out there and then getting to meet folks like yourself, I was like, maybe this isn't so bad. Because as a Sea Cadet, I had, I got to fly over to the West Coast and I felt like I was having the time of my life. But I know, things have come out that I don't want to negate people's negative experiences and such. So, um, I want kids to have fun. I want kids to have learning opportunities, and and when I say kids, I mean from kids all the way up to 25 as well.
Mm-hmm.
Where like you have young adults who are seeing the world for the first time, maybe taking that 1 year off between schools, and I want them to have an opportunity where they see things of Canada that they would normally never see, like canoeing in the Northwest Territories for a Southerner is a big
Mm-hmm.
deal, right?
Mm-hmm.
Going out to a Whitehorse is a big deal. Going to see the polar bears in, Winnipeg, or not Winnipeg, Manitoba. Like
Mm-hmm.
there are experiences that we can do together as a country that just, I remember going to Sea Cadets and I remember having all of these people from all across the country. And we were forced to do French one day and English the next. So I had to learn all the commands in French. I had to
Mm-hmm.
learn how to say them in French. And because my last name was Elliot, the French, they had a really hard time pronouncing that and would call me idiot. And I would never, ever respond to idiot, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they were like, that's your name, idiot. I'm like, no, my name is Elliot,
Mm-hmm.
not idiot. And then
Mm-hmm.
when they heard me say it, they were like, oh my gosh, like you could see the issue, right? But I was also an arrogant Albertan who didn't like the French because I was taught not to like the French
Mm-hmm.
through mainstream Western school. So I had a bit of a chip on my shoulder.
Mm-hmm. Of course. No, that happens.
Yeah, yeah. So anyway, I appreciate you sharing about Tikmavik because I want to see solutions and options for kids that are positive and
Mm-hmm.
not yeah. So thank you for that. And is there anything else you'd like to add today?
Oh, no, no, that's everything for me. Yeah, I should probably give
Wonderful.
it a sec here, but
Griffin, thank you for coming on the show and telling us about who you are and about your books and your journey of being an author, because it's just so wonderful to hear indigeneity being reclaimed, and especially through Indigenous lens. So I appreciate all you're doing, and I wish you all the best in school and post-secondary. I know it's difficult, and I hope that this helps, you know, make light of the experience at times when that racial battle fatigue, like yes, let's heal through fiction.
yeah. Well, thanks for having me on. It's
Yeah.
always great to talk to you.
Oh, always. Thank you.
All right.
Just so incredible. So glad that Griffin joined us and told us what he's doing because, as I said to him off air, our next generations need to see themselves in lit, and the post secondary education system needs overhaul because it's so racist and harmful to our people. So the sooner that we can start um, being honest about that and teaching real history as opposed to some fake colonial lens, like the better off we'll be. Because right now it is just like South Africa's apartheid, where the one truth is not the truth at all. And Nelson Mandela was treated as a terrorist because, he did speak the truth of the reality. And as opposed to here in Canada, we just shoot and kill all the natives, and Canadians don't do enough about it. So, obviously, books matter so much to me. I hope that you consider buying not just this book, pre-order, but also his second book that has already been published through Eagle Speaker Publishing. So, yeah, deep respect, mad respect, actually, for Jason Eagle Speaker's work. I hope that he does um, wonderful out there. And I know he's inspiring many folks here in Treaty 7 territory because I've seen it. I've seen it through different folks. Want to remind everybody we have our Indigenous Book Club. It's the second Monday of each month. And so the next one that's coming up is it, Andrea Maynard's book on allyship. Really excited about that. And then for January, the first one we're going to do is the report on the missing children and unmarked graves that recently came out last month, because I think it's important that folks understand the gravity of what was said. And one of the biggest things that I've been loving hearing in the news is that, Canada can't investigate itself because it never finds any wrongdoing. And that is so truthful. We do need international folks to come in and confirm the genocide, since Canadians are just absolutely committed to continuing genocide. And we also have a reconciliation action group. It's for Canadians, for settler Canadians who feel that they can do something, whether it's write letters, whether it's remind people, this isn't a group that has funding attached to it. So as a result, you can be a lot freer in what you have to say, whereas opposed to a lot of the nonprofits, they need to, be able to get their government money. So if you say, the Alberta government is being transphobic, you're going to lose your funding. So we're seeing a lot of that. Obviously, speaking of being transphobic here in Alberta, can't shout out enough to EGAL Canada. I can't shout out enough to Skipping Stone here in Calgary for the support they give to trans. Again, though, folks, very different for Indigenous people and for people who are Black, Indigenous, people of color, you know, very different experiences because of the racism that's so deep-seated in this country that nobody wants to acknowledge. So if you are, working on your anti-racism, if you've read the 94 calls to action, the 231 calls to justice, you understand your treaty partner and you want to do more, don't hesitate to join the Reconciliation Action Group if you're in the Calgary area. For folks who are tonight, I hear this all the time. I'm like, oh my God, there's nothing in my area. Guess what? There should be. And the fact that you don't know it shows you're actually not that committed to reconciliation, because every church should have one, every community association, every single thing should have a reconciliation committee, whether it's your work or whatever. And if you are so committed to reconciliation, then start that committee in your world to make it work with the people around you that are also committed. Because, there are support groups for knitting. For God's sakes, people, don't pretend like you can't do more for reconciliation. And the fact that so many non-Indigenous came onto my socials to attack me over, not supporting Taylor Swift because she doesn't do Indigenous advocacy, like that just shows you how negative this world is and how horrible it is. The ignorance that was coming through those comments. And, I just, the ignorance I seen through the passing of Murray Sinclair and not seeing enough people chiming in and saying it's wrong to say X, Y, and Z. I'm disappointed with Canadians, frankly. Anyway, at least this podcast is a place that we can talk about solutions. And obviously, I've given multiple solutions throughout this podcast today, as well as previous ones, but we'll always end with giving those, cultural safety tips, cultural first aid. So it's creating a safer space for people. So like, I'm feeling like I have to really connect the dots for people. Like, if you are looking at your business and you don't see people of color, if you're in your community association and you don't see any sort of diversity, there's reasons for it. It's not a safe cultural space. It's not a place that I would feel safe to be at. So in order to create that safer space, here are some solutions. First and foremost, you need to know about the Calgary Foundation's amazing work. They do a quality of life report, and I've been talking about it for years now in my podcasts. And according to the 2024 Quality of Life Report, 87% of members of a racialized group have experienced discrimination, whether it's on religion, ethnicity, skin color, culture, language, accent, gender, sexual orientation, some of the time, like 87%. Come on, folks. 50% of Calgarians claim to be committed to anti racism, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Yet again, look around you. If you're not seeing that, then you're not. You can pretend you're committed to it, but you have to actively do work. If you are not doing the work, you are actually not committed to anti racism, gender, um, diversity, equity, inclusion at all. If you're not working on your ableism, like I am always working on that because I apparently suck at it, um, like you have to. I'm Indigenous, so I have to work on my anti-Blackness. Although I watched my family go through the experience of coming from Austria to become Canadian citizens here, I didn't live it. Just because I'm watching Queer Family doesn't mean I live it. So these are things that are my privilege that I have to unpack. Now, as a ADHD Dene woman, obviously a lot of people have a lot more to unpack. So if I'm working on it, I'm just encouraging you to work on it too. And there is hope in all of this because I do believe that as a country, we have to see each other as community and have to work together. But if you don't see yourself as a treaty partner, like with the deepest respect, you are already anti-Indigenous. So here2help.bc.ca has a ton of information on Indigenous cultural safety and why you should care about it, because Cheryl Ward, Chelsea Branch, and Alicia Friedkin got together. They're action tools to help folks like yourself try to be better allies and create that safer space so that hopefully you start seeing more Indigenous people around you. Their work, that's part of the work and settler understanding we need. I just am lucky enough to highlight and repeat it here. Internalized racism and lateral violence is another form of violence Indigenous and marginalized folks face by the structural oppression imposed on these lands. If you go to racialequitytools.org, there's tons of resource files. And I read whenever I'm feeling like I need to work on my internalized racism, I check out Donna Bevan's work there, and I encourage people to give a donation if you can. Do's and don'ts for bystander intervention by American Friends Service Committees, afsc.org. Tons of information. If you happen to see someone say to an Indigenous person at a table, you're not Native, you have green eyes, what would you do? Well, afsc.org helps give you some tools. But if you do experience racism, you can report it at acttoendracism.ca, or you can text them at 587-507-3838. Anyone who follows me on social media, I have reposted many times the City of Calgary Committee anti-racism organizational lead doing a presentation on the journey of becoming an anti-racism leader. It's on YouTube. It's available. I'd love to hear your feedback of what you thought of it, what you learned from it. Black Lives Matter activists Taylor McNally and Adora Newfort are absolutely being legally targeted. I strongly encourage you to donate to their legal funds. If you don't understand the anti-Blackness that's happening in the city of Calgary, please go to Stop the Stack YYC, stopthestackyyc.ca. They have tons of information. Their social medias are fantastic at explaining this. At this point in time, I don't have a lot of respect for people who don't understand how anti-Black racism works, but of course had that gendered lens. And so that's what our activists are experiencing, and it's so wrong. Indigenous have been talking about our issues, sharing our traumas in reports, commissions, and public hearings, just so it can be regularly disregarded. And I'll give you an example. There was a young Indigenous man. Well, I guess he's my age, so He had to get his leg amputated, and they amputated the wrong leg. So those health calls to action, let alone the health calls to justice, just disappointing as Canadians how far we are on the racism scale. And I know people are like, "Oh my God, you shouldn't assume." Anyone who thinks that, who feels empowered to say those words, I dare you to look a little harder and deeper at how many Indigenous people have been able to sue and successfully win. Um, I need folks to listen to those politicians and their policies and their platforms. I wish people would listen to us as Indigenous people and not just disregard us. Honor our words, honor the treaties. Listen to these politicians, and if they don't care about equality, they have no business running. Demand the Truth and Reconciliation Commission calls to action be implemented. The recommendations of the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples, multiple reports about child welfare reform, uh, violence prevention. Now we have 231 calls to justice from the National Inquiry. In Alberta, we have the 113 pathways to justice. In Calgary, we have the White Goose Flying report. Disregarding all of these reports is a form of abuse called gaslighting. Our people are experiencing so much racism in every institution with multiple reports that say the same thing. We shouldn't have to do another report. It's just the ones that are existing are disregarded by Canadians. I had someone try to tell me land acknowledgements are part of the 94 calls to action. It just showed me they didn't. Um, this needs to be understood by all Canadians. Uh, Beyond that, I think people think, oh, this is for politicians, and it's not. It's for you. It's for you as a person to challenge all of the privilege you have in the world. But also, we need to see it at the community organization so that if someone like myself wants to volunteer for a casino, I'm not met with horrid things about free gas. Same with sports clubs. We're not seeing gender equity at all. And I have lots I would love to say about that, but there are calls to action. They need to deconstruct their racism so Black players feel safe as well as Indigenous ones. Google articles on how non-Indigenous Canadians can become allies because there's so many out there. The Calgary Foundation has a great ally toolkit that people can use. Stephanie Harp is a wonderful advocate up north in Alberta talking about issues on missing and murdered Indigenous women. So listen to other voices as well. I also encourage people to sign up for apps, specifically the aboriginalalert.ca and the Missing Children Society of Canada. And I can't emphasize enough when you only share the RCMP or municipal police type posts, like you're telling us that the Aboriginal alert's not good enough. So your anti-Indigenous bias is showing. And it also shows that you don't understand how harmful it is to see anything related with logos of policing to Indigenous people. So again, creating that safer environment for a safer space. And the Missing Children Society of Canada goes beyond and has like elders that are gone missing, etc. as well. Please, folks, consider using those as a form of education. They all have like files on them. So there's just no excuse anymore. Women's homelessness.ca talks about the, urgent need for action on protecting the lives of Indigenous women, girls, Two-Spirit, and gender diverse people experiencing homelessness. Right now, as a country, we've been experiencing drug poisoning deaths, and we have over 10,000 alone in Alberta, and it's unacceptable. We should be putting policies to stop this. So if you know somebody who's using substances, like I just have to say, do not use alone. If you're using alone, you can contact the National Overdose Response Service to create a safety plan. That's 888-688-NORS. You can also download the Brave, Doors, or Lifeguard app. The Doors is a Alberta-only situation and not necessarily transparent in their information. I strongly support Freedom's Path Recovery Society.ca. You can donate to them. They provide free one-on-one addictions counseling, group treatment for recovery for Calgary, the queer-friendly, anti-racist, and as many of you have heard, I've been fully supporting Canada's first 2S LGBTQ addiction recovery centre of stonewallrecovery.ca. If you're experiencing emotional distress after anything I talked about today and need to talk, you can call the First Nation and Inuit Hope for Wellness helpline at 855-242-3310. It is open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You can also text at hopeforwellness.ca. And if more related to missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, Two-Spirit, and gender diverse, you can call 844-413-6649. There is also a 60 Scoop Indigenous Society of Alberta at ssisa.ca. They may be able to help you as well. They are not a crisis call by any situation. They are just the support for as you navigate this ridiculous racist world that we are all forced to be in. The Indian Residential School Survivor Family Hotline is 866-925-4419. Kids Help Phone is 1-800-668-6868. You can text 686868, and they have a live chat from 7 to midnight Eastern Time, though. Native Youth Crisis Hotline is 877-209-1266. The LGBT Youth Line you can use at it's a text only, 647-694-4275, or go to youthline.ca. Non-Indigenous, there's always distress lines in your area, a functioning 211, and the new national number of 988. Text 988 or go to 988.ca. For 2S LGBTQ crisis supports, Toronto has a wonderful new pilot that's happening. All you do is call 211 for that one. You can find out more at the number 2, spirits with an S.org, and find out more about that pilot. For my American friends, for all of my international listeners, I thank you. For my American listeners, I thank you. And the Two Spirit Identity Strong Hearts Helpline.org is 844-7-NATIVE or 844-762-8433. It Gets Better Canada.org has tons of resources for gender diverse, but just a warning for QT BIPOC. I've seen some of the organizations listed in Alberta, and not all of them practice anti-racism or have Indigenous education. So again, you may want to try the MMIW GTT line in order to get that understanding of Indigenous issues. Violence is my everyday reality. Every Indigenous generation faces it. Self-care, how I take my power back. It's why I started the podcast, to speak freely without interruption and tone police and leadership shaming and gaslighting questions by people who are not coming in good faith and don't really want to hear my opinion, but sure like to tell us all about their ignorance. People who don't know not anything about us, but also colonialism. I don't think I emphasize enough the constant surveillance of Indigenous people, whether I'm at a casino by security, whether I go to a Walmart and the security there, other white people always trying to tell me what I can and cannot say. There's not an understanding of that, but also we've talked extensively with experts on surveillance in Canada that acknowledge that as Indigenous people, we are constantly being surveilled. It was Stephen Harper that made me liberal because of taking the Indian Act list and giving it to the CSIS. Like our protests, our vigils, our rights, like we are constantly surveilled. So I and many others share all info about this all the time. So I encourage you to listen to other Indigenous voices if you don't want to hear it from me. Learn about being trauma informed. So, when a person doesn't be like, oh my God, thank you so much, I'm so grateful for you, there's a reason for it. And if you're not trauma informed, then you may not understand and may expect QT BIPOC to be, accommodating your ego. And so you have to learn how to not center yourself and learn about being trauma informed. Folks like me are dealing with internalized racism, gatekeeping, obviously the status quo in general. People who are really in their trauma and would rather attack me than attack, the system. So this depletes personal resources and personal um, health as well. So internal, external racism, like this is an everyday reality for me, as well as Indigenous people, ableism and folks with disabilities, QT BIPOC and gendered violence, along with racism. I do want to say thank you to my ancestors, my granny, my mom, of what strength looks like through your example, my dad for teaching me to be strong and blunt, my stepmom for showing me a proud culture through her Austrian family, and to my husband, Darcy. I am so grateful that you are my support in this journey. You produce, you edit, you are my husband, my childhood friend, father of our child, and you've witnessed decades of racism and sexism. And to our child, we are blessed to learn from you daily and honored you chose us. You give me daily accountability to be a better and stronger person. My hope is my family will be proud of us in the future, discussing these issues today in a way that they can understand. I also honor the Blackfoot, not just as a treaty partner, I'm on your territory, but that all of the members, the elders, language keepers have been so kind to me on my journey. Elder Red Crane taught me how to pronounce my spirit name in Blackfoot. Leonard Kenny taught me how to pronounce my spirit name in Satu Dene. My humblest apologies to the elders and language keepers as I try to learn proper pronunciation. My patron account is Native Calgarian, where you can pledge and support. Thank you, previous donors, for showing your support. If you value listening or watching and can afford to give, thank you. For those who cannot afford to give, I'd love to hear from you at nativeyyc@gmail.com, where you can send in your comments or questions. I have a YouTube channel. You can go and subscribe. You can go to nativecalgarian.com for more. The last thing I want to do always is talk about some of the good things in this world. And as many of you know, my little Chihuahua passed away. So I did go to Walmart and get a whole bunch of pictures developed. So we get to look at our cute little patootie potato all the time. And been really enjoying watching a lot of dog reels and especially Chihuahuas on all of the socials. I think one of the things that I wanted to really talk about was this adorable video that I have shown. I've seen so many of them of this little baby learning the haka from his dad. And the reason why that matters is I think that nationally there was just this moment of pride, internationally, I should say, watching this New Zealand parliament have a disruption by the haka because of them trying to negotiate treaties, which they've never done before. And in the colonial setting, in that Westminster, governance from Britain, just not respecting and understanding the need to have equity, equality, and what treaty partnership means. And the irony is because these, Western colonial folks from the Westminster belief system cannot wrap their heads around this. Like we will end up having to do like a South African apartheid where it just all goes back to South Africans and Britain and British ideals just get kicked out altogether if there cannot be a better understanding of compromise. So I'm watching that obviously with keen interest, knowing that the New Zealand folks there, the Maori, are absolutely standing up for themselves and saying no. And obviously Western colonizers, they don't understand the word no very well. They have no boundaries. So yeah, I hope they can figure it out in a way that works for everybody. So anyway, that gave me a lot of pride. I hope I've seen so many people, dissecting that, and especially the grandmom that was elected, that was sitting beside her, watching her with pride, and watching the Speaker of the House just losing it, just a big baby, and seeing that the haka was also amplified in the audience as well. Like just an incredible moment. And I'm just getting goosebumps thinking about it, talking about it. So I hope that touched you. the way it touched me. And I always end by giving side eye to those Calgary rabbits. You're lucky I'm not tradish. And my beautiful cousin would respond, or you'd be in my dish. Thanks, folks, for listening. As always, take care.